Beneath the smoke of wars we thought we understood lies a darker silence, sealed files, erased maps, and signals still whispering across forgotten frequencies. These are not tales of battles fought in daylight, but shadows cast by vanished convoys, buried vaults, and experiments never meant to see the light. In every archive stamped classified, there lingers a question more dangerous than an answer. What was hidden, and why did those who buried it fear the world ever knowing? In late April 1945, as Allied forces pressed into the ruins of Nazi Germany, the British War Office authorized a classified mission under the codename Operation Eclipse. While the name publicly referred to the wider plan for securing northern Germany and dismantling the Wehrmacht's final resistance, an internal annex marked Special Handling Only detailed an entirely separate naval operation. It involved a convoy of 3 merchant vessels, the SS Empire Falcon, SS Laconic, and SS Harrier, escorted by 2 Hunt-class destroyers, HMS Zetland and HMS Melbrake. Their mission? To transport captured intelligence files, experimental prototypes, and confiscated Reich archives from Kiel Naval Base back to Portsmouth for processing by the Ministry of Supply and the newly established Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS. According to the manifest signed on 3 May 1945, cargo included steel crates sealed under Royal Engineers supervision, listed only as materials, special scientific interest, alongside thousands of microfilm canisters and confiscated personnel, files taken from Gestapo headquarters in Lübeck. The convoy sailed at dawn on 5 May, slipping into the North Sea under. When the Wehrmacht finally capitulated in May 1945, not all German scientists ended up in American custody under the widely publicized Operation Paperclip. Soviet intelligence, operating under the GRU and the NKVD, launched their own covert program of forced recruitment, codenamed Osoaviakim. On the night of 21st October 1946, entire families of German engineers and technicians were seized from the ruins of Dresden, Leipzig, and the outskirts of Berlin, loaded onto rail convoys and transported eastward. Among them were specialists from Peenemünde Army Research Center, men who had once worked under Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger on the V-2 rocket program. The Soviets did not take them to Moscow or Leningrad, as the West had assumed. Instead, they vanished into Siberia. Decades later, a fragmentary dossier surfaced in Novosibirsk archives, stamped Project Boreas, do not circulate. It contained technical sketches of elongated V-2 derivatives labeled R13 polar configuration, annotated in both German and Russian, and chilling memoranda dated February 1947, describing atmospheric experiments conducted beyond the polar circle at coordinates undisclosed. Defector testimony gathered by the CIA in the 1960s pointed to a compound known only as Site 222, located near the frozen Yenisei River basin. There, according to surviving engineers, rocket launches were staged not for ballistic payloads, but for ionospheric disruption, attempts to scatter Allied long-range radio communication and jam Arctic radar stations newly established by the US Air Force. A 1948 report by GRU Colonel Sergei Orlovsky, later translated by American analysts, referred to electro-atmospheric disturbance capacity and warned of unpredictable effects on auroral interference. The file was abruptly closed in 1949 after a catastrophic test caused an explosion so violent that Soviet meteorological stations in Norilsk recorded it as a seismic anomaly. Survivors were transferred to closed facilities under false names. Others were never heard from again. When the USSR later unveiled its early ICBM capabilities, the West remained unaware of these failed parallel projects buried in the ice. The last known reference appeared in a KGB registry entry from 1957, reading simply, "Boreas material stored in Hangar 4, decommissioned." During the 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, researchers combing through declassified archives in Novosibirsk stumbled upon a stack of degraded photographic plates. The images showed massive steel hangars, half buried under permafrost, with rusted gantry cranes still upright in the snow. The plates were marked Property of Ministry of Medium Machine Building, 1949 done, a cover organization for Soviet nuclear and missile development. Western intelligence quietly acquired copies, though Moscow insisted the photographs were forgeries. By then, legends had already circulated among locals of the fires in the northern sky and trains that arrived, with Germans who never returned. Whether Project Boreas achieved any operational success remains unknown, but its existence points to a shadow war waged not only in Berlin and Washington, but also in the frozen silence of Siberia, where men once loyal to Hitler were compelled to build weapons for Stalin, and where archives of those experiments remain sealed beneath layers of ice and secrecy. In the aftermath of Germany's surrender in May 1945, Allied intelligence officers in Rome were confronted not only with shattered infrastructure and starving civilians, but with whispers of a hidden network smuggling SS officers out of Europe. What began as scattered rumors became concrete when a cache of OSS memoranda was uncovered in a requisitioned palazzo near the Tiber. Within a locked filing drawer, investigators found a folder marked Ratline Codes, Restricted. Inside were cipher sheets, Vatican diplomatic letterheads, and encrypted ledgers cataloguing names of men once attached to the SS Totenkopfverbände, the Sicherheitsdienst, and even remnants of the Einsatzgruppen. The entries were not simple, transit records, but layered codes, references to pilgrims and monasteries, masking fugitives moving along clandestine routes through Genoa and Trieste toward ships bound for South America. Among the code names, investigators noted recurring mentions of container duis, an apparent archive of microfilmed records said to be buried under monastic grounds in Lazio, possibly beneath the Benedictine Abbey of Subiaco. Each page carried both Latin script and numeric substitutions suggestive of Vatican cipher practices used by the Secretariat of State. In June 1946, Major Robert Ainsworth of British Field Security Section 226 submitted a confidential report stating, "We are not dealing with isolated clerical sympathizers, but with a structured and systematized channel of extraction protected by diplomatic privilege." Attempts to act were stifled. Requests for excavation of monastic properties were blocked by Italian authorities under pressure from ecclesiastical offices, and a joint US-British tasking order to seize container tutus in autumn 1946 was abruptly rescinded without explanation. One American officer, Captain William Donahue, wrote privately to his wife, "Our orders come down blacked out, as though someone higher has already decided the matter must remain buried." By 1947, OSS had dissolved into the CIA, and most Ratline files were reclassified under restricted access. Nevertheless, fragments leaked. Declassified Argentine immigration records later revealed dozens of arrivals between 1947 and 1949 under forged Red Cross passports, many matching names within the Vatican cipher ledgers. Among them was Dr. Aribert Heim, the camp doctor from Mauthausen, who entered Buenos Aires under a false clerical sponsorship. Yet the fate of Container 13 remains unresolved. In the 1960s, an anonymous letter reached the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, claiming that microfilm reels hidden under stone and sacrament in Lazio contained lists of Vatican officials complicit in the smuggling. The letter vanished into internal files and was never investigated. Today, historians tracing Operation Ratline confront an opaque wall of silence. Archives sealed, Vatican responses evasive, Italian military police records misplaced. What persists is the troubling knowledge that within those cipher ledgers, entire pages of Europe's darkest figures were marked not for trial, but for passage, and that the true contents of Container 13, if it exists, remain under earth and oath, beyond the reach of any tribunal. In April 1945, as US forces closed in on Okinawa, in what would become the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, naval intelligence officers aboard Task Force 58 began noticing irregularities in Japanese air attacks. Radar operators reported swarms of incoming kamikazes that appeared on screens only moments before impact, despite established detection ranges of over 100 miles. In several action reports filed by the USS Bunker Hill and USS Intrepid, officers wrote of sudden blackouts on radar scopes coinciding with concentrated suicide strikes. Declassified memoranda housed at the Naval Historical Center refer, cryptically, to a Japanese program codenamed Kurakaze, Black Wind. This project, developed by engineers of the Imperial Japanese Army's Noborito Research Institute in cooperation with remnants of the Navy's Yokosuka Air Arsenal, allegedly combined chemical dispersal canisters with crude radio frequency jamming devices mounted on modified aircraft. The dispersal, thought to be a form of aerosolized metallic particles, was designed to scatter in the air and disrupt radar signals, while psychological reports suggested it created panic among sailors convinced they were under chemical attack. On 11 May 1945, during the infamous mass kamikaze assault that crippled USS Bunker Hill, Navy records note that 3 radar operators collapsed from what was initially described as hysteria induced by sensory confusion. A subsequent classified medical assessment, conducted at Guam Naval Hospital, cited symptoms of disorientation, nausea, and temporary blindness, consistent with exposure to unknown agents. After Japan's surrender, US Army Technical Intelligence teams scoured Okinawa and Kyushu for evidence of Kurakaze. In a partially redacted report dated September 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Fellers of the 5250th Technical Intelligence Company wrote, "Captured documentation references Project Kurakaze, initiated late 1944, aimed at interference of Allied detection and morale. Technical notes describe airborne dispersal of metallic oxide compounds with concurrent radio pulse emissions. Effectiveness unconfirmed, but anecdotal accounts suggest correlation with radar anomalies observed during April-June Okinawa operations." The documents were immediately classified under top-secret restricted data. By 1951, amid the early stages of the Korean War, Pentagon officials revisited the files, concerned that Soviet forces might replicate such technology. However, much of the original Japanese material had already been destroyed or transferred into deep storage. A handful of photographs survive, showing dismantled aircraft fuselages with unfamiliar wiring and cylindrical tanks affixed to wings, stamped with kanji characters for special wind. The last known mention of Kurakaze appeared in a CIA memorandum from 1953, noting possible Soviet interest in Japanese aerosol electronic countermeasure experiments. Shortly thereafter, references vanish entirely, with most documentation incinerated under routine archival purges. What remains is a shadowy trail of fragmented reports, unexplained radar failures, and the testimony of sailors who swore they felt a black wind sweep across their decks before the sky erupted in flame. Whether Kurakaze represented a genuine breakthrough in electronic warfare or merely the desperate improvisation of a collapsing empire, its traces linger only in redacted files and half-erased logbooks from the final chaotic months of World War II. In the winter of 1946, Allied listening posts along the Danish coast began intercepting strange radio transmissions pulsing across the shortwave spectrum at irregular intervals. At first dismissed as atmospheric interference, the signals soon revealed a chilling familiarity to cryptanalysts in London. Their cadence mirrored Kriegsmarine Enigma naval ciphers, the very codes used by U-boat wolfpacks before Germany's collapse. According to a declassified MI9 monitoring report dated 12 February 1946, the transmissions originated somewhere along the Baltic shoreline of Estonia, a region abandoned in haste by retreating German forces the previous year. When a joint British-Swedish reconnaissance effort landed near the ruins of a coastal artillery bunker outside Paldiski, they discovered half-collapsed tunnels filled with rusted generators, still faintly warm from recent use. Within the bunker lay racks of primitive auto-transmitters rigged to batteries and auto-generators, wired to repeat cipher sequences indefinitely without human intervention. The machines were marked with faint stencils of the 2 U-boot Lehr Division, a training unit disbanded in 1945. Among the debris were canisters of fuel, ration tins dated late 1944, and a single Enigma rotor, scorched but intact. The site was secured and files marked Special Counterintelligence Interest. Yet before London could complete analysis, Soviet NKVD detachments swept into Estonia under the guise of securing coastal defences. When Allied teams returned weeks later, the bunker had been sealed with concrete, its contents stripped. From 1947 onwards, reports of ghost stations continued, mysterious broadcasts repeating fragments of naval ciphers, some traceable as far as Leningrad monitoring nets, others bouncing across the Arctic Circle. CIA cables from 1952 refer to them as phantom traffic, with one memorandum suggesting they were Soviet efforts to mask submarine activity beneath the cover of residual German signals. But a classified US Navy intercept file, dated 8th October 1956, noted that certain cipher groups broadcast from the Baltic matched uncatalogued sequences never decrypted during the war, implying the stations were not post-war Soviet fabrications, but genuine continuations of forgotten Kriegsmarine code cycles. Fishermen out of Tallinn spoke of hearing the hum of engines underground and reported sealed bunkers along the coast, guarded by Soviet troops long after their supposed abandonment. The transmissions faded by the early 1960s, though Swedish amateur operators continued to log intermittent bursts as late as 1963. Today, surviving documentation is fragmented, redacted British SIGINT files, half-burned Soviet maps, and testimony from defectors who claimed the Soviets had found machines that did not require men, only patience. Whether the ghost stations were relics of a Reich attempt to maintain a phantom naval command after defeat, or whether they were deliberately perpetuated by Soviet intelligence to manipulate Western cryptanalysis, remains unresolved. What is certain is that for nearly 2 decades after Germany's surrender, the Baltic Sea carried echoes of a dead war, voices in code tapping out orders to U-boats that would never return, fading eventually into silence without explanation or closure. The echoes of these secrets have not vanished. They drift between locked doors, frozen bunkers, and corridors of power where memory is a weapon. What we have seen are fragments, glimpses through torn pages, transmissions cut mid-sentence. Yet, in those silences, the weight of what was concealed presses hardest, reminding us that history is not only written by the victors, it is guarded by those who still fear what would happen if the truth ever escaped.